Hello again, everybody. This is Rusty, aka William Robinson, aka Dr. Robinson, and I am the Blues Doctor. This is my podcast, The Blues Doctor Recommends, and we're glad you're here. We got back to the beach just in time for the dog days of summer, and they're living up to their name this year. It has been miserably hot and humid here, like it has in a lot of the country, I guess. So we're just trying to get through it. So the best thing for you to do is to get inside in the air conditioning, watch this show, sit back, make suggestions, like and subscribe, all of those things, and we'll hope to make you forget about the heat for a while. We didn't do a calendar segment last week because we were out of town, but I just couldn't overlook something that I saw on the calendar. Elvis Presley died 48 years ago, August 16th, 1977. It was hard to describe the impact this had at the time. I am from Memphis and I was in Memphis at the time, and I can remember where I was when I heard. I was actually on the front porch of my house with a cousin of mine, and his sister drove up in the car, parked, stopped in front, and jumped out of the car and told us or asked, did you hear about Elvis? And we hadn't, so we ran inside, turned on the TV, and it was on every channel. I tried to call my mother, but all the phone lines were down. There were so many thousands of calls coming into Memphis that the switchboard or whatever they called it then just couldn't handle it. So there was no dial tone in any phones in Memphis at the time. Within a few hours, every airline flight, every bus trip, every rental car that was available was coming into Memphis. You couldn't get a flight into Memphis after that. The mayor of the town declared a day of mourning for the next day, and most of the businesses closed down. Every TV station was showing nonstop pictures of people crying, people lined up as in a vigil of sorts in front of Graceland on Elvis Presley Boulevard, and that ran 24 hours a day for about a week. The thousands of people who lined up in front of the gates were from literally all over the world. It really had a huge impact on Memphis. Elvis had his faults, but he was our guy, and we stuck by him. I was lucky enough to have some firsthand knowledge, actually, of the Elvis death case just a few years later as a medical student at the University of Tennessee, which is in Memphis. Actually, let me back up a little bit and explain that there was controversy at first, or still is, I guess, around Elvis' death, and part of that stemmed from the fact that most people assumed that Elvis' death would be a coroner's case. That is, it would require a full autopsy, including toxicology, and that it would become a part of public record. However, that was not the case. Under Tennessee law at the time, it was not a coroner's case because Elvis had died at home under care by a physician, who was Dr. Nicopolis, if you've heard of him, for a known condition, which was heart disease, which Dr. Nicopolis had diagnosed him with. Therefore, no autopsy was required by law. The family actually requested the autopsy and the drug analysis privately, so it was not part of public record officially. The autopsy was actually done by Dr. Jerry Francisco, who was the Shelby County coroner and also the chief of forensic pathology, forensic pathology, that's hard to say, at the University of Tennessee Medical School, where I was a medical student. He had a press conference after he did the autopsy where he stated that the cause of death was actually heart failure, without mentioning drug abuse in any way. He, Dr. Francisco, was heavily criticized for that because many people assumed the cause of Elvis' death was a drug overdose and, for whatever reason, wanted to smear Elvis' image and his legacy. The autopsy was sealed by the family officially for 50 years, but the toxicology leaked just a few years later and it showed multiple drugs in Elvis' system, but none of them were in overdose levels. Then cut to 1983. I was a medical student then, and I did a rotation in forensic pathology with Dr. Francisco. I told him I was an Elvis fan, and he seemed to like me for whatever reason. He actually got the official report out and showed it to me. He even showed me the remaining specimens that he had, including microscopic slides and some gross specimens of Elvis's tissue. He was required by law to hold on to them for a certain number of years. So he looked at him with me and described what he saw, and there was very obvious, even a fourth year medical student could tell there was grossly severe heart disease on both microscopic slides and the gross specimen of cardiac muscle. So it indicated Elvis had been in heart failure for some time prior to that. So I can absolutely confirm that Elvis died of a heart attack, just as his mother had, who also died at a young age. So the king really died that day. There was no conspiracy to cover up the truth or do anything else nefarious. I think you could argue that Elvis's music brought more joy to more people all over the world than anybody, maybe with the exception of the Beatles. But boy, it would be close. And as I said, Elvis was a Memphis guy. He was our boy till the end. R.I.P. Elvis Presley. For our health segment this week, I had to think for a while about what to talk about, and finally, I actually noticed that there were several questions for me in the chat and elsewhere. And there's been recently some news that was pertinent to this, and that is cannabis use in the United States. Now, I think there's a number of misconceptions and, frankly, misuses of marijuana law. So I thought we could talk about that a little bit today. Marijuana has been a Schedule 1 controlled substance under U.S. federal law for decades. That means it has no legit medical uses and it's considered on the same level as heroin and LSD and some others. You may have also noticed that last week President Trump mentioned that he was considering changing that classification to lessen the severity, presumably, of violation of federal law for marijuana use. And I believe most physicians, including me, would suggest that's been a long time coming. There have been literally hundreds of published reports on the use of marijuana that show minimal to almost no toxic effects. It certainly has much less effect than alcohol, for example, on the liver, the kidneys, the brain. It's not addictive as alcohol is. So it is really a much less toxic agent than alcohol. Smoking marijuana could potentially aggravate asthma or maybe some other respiratory diseases, but that's about it. So, are there any uses, medical uses for marijuana? And the answer is yes. The most well documented are as anti nausea or so called anti wasting agents. Cancer patients receiving chemotherapy can have tremendous nausea and vomiting to the point almost that it can be life threatening. We have used a number of drugs in the past to help that out, but any oncology doctor who's been around for a while will tell you that some patients simply don't respond to anything and continue to throw up nonstop. The active ingredient in marijuana is called THC or tetrahydrocannabinol, and that agent has actually been very effective for minimizing nausea. In fact, we've had a synthetic THC that's been available commercially for many years for use in refractory or uncontrolled nausea and vomiting. But it's relatively expensive and is prescription only, and not every pharmacy will carry it. So I've actually told patients who can't get it for one reason or another, but who are refractory to all of the other anti-nausea medications, that they should just go out and get some marijuana in the streets and try that. And a number of them have told me that they got some relief from that. Interestingly, children in particular seem to respond better to THC than do adults. Adults will also, but some adults will have some degree of dysphoria. In other words, they'll have a feeling that just isn't right and they don't like it. Children don't seem to get that for whatever reason. It's also used, or THC can also be used for wasting diseases like HIV/AIDS or severe trauma or certain kinds of arthritis or other things by controlling weight loss and by increasing weight gain to help them recover faster. There are potentially several other medical uses for marijuana, like as a anti-inflammatory agent for arthritis or to treat immune system diseases where the immune system is overreactive. Can help with pain control and is certainly less toxic than most opioids. There are probably even more potential uses, but there's been relatively little lab research done with marijuana because as a Schedule 1 agent, it's been very hard to obtain even for laboratory purposes. Then, given all this, you may ask, so why is marijuana a Schedule 1 classification? And why were users pursued so aggressively by law enforcement for so many years? Sadly, I think this is another example of America's racial problem. It's been perceived for many years that marijuana was disproportionately used by Black Americans in the US. It was really not until the late 60s that white college kids began to use it in any significant numbers. So, aggressive enforcement of marijuana laws became a convenient and effective method to maintain some degree of control on those components of society which are considered on the fringes, I guess. Far more blacks than whites have been incarcerated over the years for marijuana and typically with much harsher sentences. Plus, in the last 30 years or so, many local jails have been paid by the state or by whatever their local jurisdiction is on a per capita basis. That means if they have more prisoners, they make more money. The easy way to get more prisoners, or an easy way to get more prisoners, is to go after the marijuana users. They were typically nonviolent. They were typically black. They were typically poor, and therefore they couldn't afford a real attorney to defend them. So it was relatively easy to maximize your revenues by jailing marijuana users. The good news is, over the last 10 years or so, many states have substantially relaxed their marijuana laws. In a number of states, including California and Colorado and Illinois and elsewhere, it's actually legal now both for medical and recreational use. The southern states, I guess maybe not surprisingly, have been slower to that reach that point, but even they are now changing. In Louisiana now, medical marijuana use is allowed, and in many cities, including New Orleans, for example, one of my hometowns, they have actually openly decided not to enforce marijuana laws in that jurisdiction. I suspect that if or when President Trump removes marijuana from the Schedule 1 classification, many of the holdout states will lessen their laws as well. So, to summarize, marijuana has minimal toxicity, but it has multiple potential medical uses and some that are very well documented. I am therefore all for changing the laws regarding marijuana. If you have questions or concerns about that for me, please don't hesitate to ask me in the comments or by messaging. If you think I'm foolish for supporting marijuana, let me know. I maybe you can change my mind. I doubt it, but maybe. We've talked about some heavy subjects today, so let's finish up with something, a little more fun. And that's about all we have for now. We're back home again, and it's good to be back home. We'll be back on a regular schedule now with the podcast for the foreseeable future, at least. So please watch next week's podcast, okay? See you later.